What happens when two people who both fear intimacy try to build a relationship together? When both people in a relationship have avoidant attachment styles, they create a unique dynamic where everyone wants connection, but nobody wants to be vulnerable first. The relationship becomes a standoff, where both people wait for safety that never comes, because neither person is willing to create it. Two avoidants in a relationship both want closer connection, but both refuse to move first. Each person waits for the other to initiate vulnerability, to break the emotional distance, to take the risk of opening up. Neither person moves. The relationship stays locked in a pattern where both people protect themselves by staying emotionally distant, creating a dynamic where connection exists, but intimacy never develops. In the beginning, this relationship feels like finding your perfect match. Both people value independence. Both respect personal space. Neither pressures the other for constant contact or emotional depth. There's no clinginess, no neediness, no relationship anxiety. Something strange starts happening, though. The connection never gets deeper. Conversations circle around the same safe topics. Emotional sharing stays minimal. The relationship feels comfortable but hollow, like you're close to someone you barely know. Both people start feeling lonely despite being together, and neither can quite explain why. What's really happening beneath the surface is a psychological waiting game. Both people are waiting for the other person to create safety by being vulnerable first. Each avoidant has learned that opening up emotionally carries risk, so they keep their walls up until they feel absolutely certain the other person won't hurt them. But that certainty never arrives because the other person is playing the exact same waiting game. Both protecting themselves, both waiting for proof, both needing the other to go first. The relationship gets trapped in this loop where neither person will take the risk required to build real intimacy. The solution to breaking this standoff sounds completely backwards at first. You'd think the answer would be more communication, more effort to connect, more conversations about feelings and needs. That's not what works with two avoidants, though. What actually breaks the pattern is one person doing something that seems like it would make everything worse, genuinely pulling back and reducing their investment in the relationship. This feels counterintuitive, because pulling back sounds like creating more distance in a relationship that's already too distant. The psychology behind why it works reveals something fascinating about how avoidant attachment operates. When both avoidants maintain comfortable distance together, neither person's attachment system activates. They both feel safe in the predictability of their mutual avoidance. There's no threat, no anxiety, no fear of loss. One person authentically disengaging shifts something in the other person's brain, though. The comfortable distance that felt safe suddenly registers as potential abandonment. The mutual avoidance that seemed balanced suddenly feels one-sided. The person who was perfectly content with surface-level connection suddenly realizes they might lose even that, and this realization triggers them to move forward in ways they never would have when both people were stuck in the standoff together. In practical terms, what does this actually look like? The person who decides to break the pattern stops initiating most of the contact. When the other person reaches out, they respond, but without their usual warmth or engagement. Their emotional availability decreases in ways the other person can feel. They stop trying to create deeper conversations or push for more intimacy. They fill their schedule with activities and commitments that genuinely interest them, becoming less accessible than before. Their actions demonstrate they're completely fine whether the relationship continues or ends. Their mood stays stable regardless of how much attention or effort the other person gives. Authenticity becomes the critical piece here. If someone performs disengagement while secretly obsessing over the other person's reaction, that inauthenticity bleeds through in subtle ways. The other avoidant picks up on the manipulation, and their defenses strengthen rather than their attachment activating. Genuine pulling back comes from honest reassessment of whether this relationship actually meets your needs. It comes from recognizing that staying in a connection stuck at surface level indefinitely leaves you feeling empty. It comes from truly accepting that the relationship might end and feeling okay about that possibility. This authenticity makes all the difference because the other person perceives real change, not strategy. A shift starts happening when one person genuinely pulls back. The avoidant who was comfortable with the standoff experiences something unfamiliar. Anxiety about the relationship starts creeping in. The safety they felt from mutual distance evaporates. They begin questioning what changed and why. They notice the other person seems less invested, less available, less interested in maintaining even the minimal connection they had before. This disruption to their predictable pattern does something important. It activates their attachment system. Our attachment system is the part of our brain that manages emotional bonds and motivates us to maintain important relationships. In avoidance, though, this system stays mostly dormant because they've learned to suppress it as a way of protecting themselves from disappointment and hurt. As long as both people in the relationship maintain comfortable distance, neither person's attachment system has any reason to activate. Everything feels secure in its predictability. When one person disrupts that pattern through real disengagement, the other person's brain suddenly registers that something valuable might be disappearing. Their comfortable independence transforms into loneliness. Their preference for space starts feeling like rejection. The relationship they took for granted becomes uncertain, and this uncertainty wakes up the attachment response they've been keeping quiet. Behavioral changes in the other person start becoming visible at this point. They begin initiating contact more frequently than before. They ask questions about your well-being and what you've been up to. They suggest activities or deeper conversations they never initiated during the standoff. They show concern about the relationship that seemed completely absent when both of you were mutually avoidant. They might not explicitly say they're worried about losing you, but their increased effort to connect speaks clearly about what's happening internally. Loss aversion is the psychological principle driving this shift. Research in behavioral psychology shows that humans fear losing what they have significantly more than they desire gaining something new. For loss aversion to kick in, though, the person needs to genuinely believe they might lose something. Two avoidants stuck in a standoff don't trigger each other's loss aversion because both people remain consistently available despite the emotional distance. Neither fears losing the relationship because nothing about the dynamic suggests loss is actually possible. Everyone stays put. One person authentically pulling back changes everything, demonstrating through sustained changes in behavior that they're redirecting their emotional energy elsewhere. The other person's loss aversion finally activates. They recognize they might actually lose this person, and that recognition motivates them to show up differently than they ever did during the standoff. Critical mistakes can destroy this entire process before it has a chance to work. Breaking your new pattern too early becomes the most damaging mistake. Someone pulls back for a short period, sees the other avoidant reach out or show increased interest, and immediately returns to their previous behavior. This sends a clear message to the other person. Nothing has fundamentally changed. The distance was temporary, not a genuine shift in how you relate to the relationship. The other avoidant's brief period of increased engagement gets rewarded. Their attachment system calms back down, and they return to their comfortable distance. The standoff resets, often more solidly entrenched than before, because now the other person has proof that the relationship will continue, regardless of their lack of effort. Explaining your actions creates another significant problem. When someone tells the other avoidant they're pulling back, or explains why they need space, or announces they're reassessing whether the relationship works for them, the psychological impact vanishes. The other person's attachment system only activates in response to perceived genuine loss, not in response to someone announcing they're trying to create that perception. Words about distance don't carry the same weight as actual behavioral distance. Explaining turns an organic shift into a stated strategy, and the other avoidance brain immediately categorizes it as manipulation or as an ultimatum. Both trigger defensive responses rather than attachment activation. Manipulation tactics undermine everything because avoidants can sense inauthenticity even when they can't articulate what feels off. If your pulling back isn't rooted in genuine self-reflection and honest evaluation of your needs, the performance shows through your behavior. Avoidants often have highly sensitive radar for manipulation because they've frequently used similar strategies themselves. They recognize when someone creates distance strategically versus when someone redirects their emotional investment authentically. Detecting manipulation, they don't respond with fear of loss. They respond with justification for their own distance, using your behavior as evidence that emotional games are part of relationships, which reinforces their avoidance rather than challenging it. Secret hope for reconciliation while you pull back creates internal conflict that manifests in your actions. You might reduce contact while compulsively checking whether they've reached out. You might build your own life while doing it all to make them want you back. You might claim indifference while your energy screams investment. This divided state communicates through micro-behaviors the other person picks up on subconsciously. The most powerful version of pulling back comes from genuinely making peace with either outcome, them recognizing your value and stepping up, or you moving forward without them. True acceptance of both possibilities as okay means your behavior carries a different quality. There's no neediness hidden under your independence. There's no agenda buried in your disengagement. There's just honest redirection of emotional energy away from a relationship that isn't meeting your needs. Two distinct responses might emerge from the other avoidant, and both responses give you crucial information about the relationship's viability. Some avoidants, when faced with genuine possibility of loss, finally step forward. They start pursuing the relationship with effort they never showed during the standoff. They communicate more openly about their feelings. They initiate plans and deeper conversations. They demonstrate through consistent actions over time that they recognize what they stand to lose, and they're willing to work differently to maintain the connection. This response happens when the avoidant has enough self-awareness and emotional capacity to use their fear of loss as motivation for examining their patterns and choosing differently. Understanding this response requires recognizing it's just the beginning, not the solution. The other person stepping up when they fear losing you shows their attachment system can activate, which is necessary but not sufficient for lasting change. The real test comes in the following weeks and months. Do they maintain their increased effort once they feel secure again? Do they continue showing up emotionally even when the threat of loss fades? Do they work on understanding and shifting their deeper avoidant patterns, or do they revert to comfortable distance once they believe you're staying? Many avoidants will chase when threatened with loss, but gradually return to their avoidant behaviors once they feel the relationship is secure again. They cycle between anxiety about losing you and anxiety about too much intimacy, creating a pattern that can repeat endlessly unless they commit to addressing their core attachment issues. Further retreat becomes the other possible response. Other avoidants respond to the threat of loss by increasing their distance even further. The anxiety triggered by potential abandonment feels more overwhelming than the loneliness of being alone. They retreat deeper into self-sufficiency, convincing themselves they never needed the connection in the first place. They might become almost cold in their detachment, as if the relationship never mattered. They rationalize their avoidance with narratives about independence being healthier than attachment, or about relationships requiring too much compromise. This response indicates their fear of intimacy runs deeper than their fear of loss. When an avoidant chooses further retreat in response to your genuine disengagement, they're showing you exactly how they handle emotional discomfort, by running from it rather than working through it. Clarity emerges from both responses about who this person is and what they're capable of in relationships. If they step forward with sustained effort and demonstrate willingness to examine their avoidant patterns, you get to decide whether their changed behavior meets your needs and whether you believe it's sustainable long-term. If they retreat further or show temporary change that quickly reverts to old patterns, you learn that your pulling back didn't trigger enough concern to motivate real growth. This information is painful but valuable. It confirms that no amount of perfect behavior on your part could have created a different outcome. Their inability or unwillingness to show up differently isn't about your worth. It's about their relationship to vulnerability and intimacy itself. Something crucial gets revealed about both people's relationship to connection through the standoff between two avoidants. When both people prioritize protecting themselves over building intimacy. When both people need the other to go first before they'll risk vulnerability. When both people remain more comfortable with loneliness together than with the risk of deeper connection, the relationship can't develop past a certain point. One person pulling back doesn't fix the other person's avoidance. It simply creates conditions where the other person has to decide whether their fear of loss is stronger than their fear of intimacy. That decision belongs entirely to them. Your role in breaking the standoff isn't about making the other person change. Honest evaluation of whether a relationship stuck at surface level serves your emotional needs becomes your actual role, along with being willing to redirect your energy when it doesn't. Whether that redirection motivates the other person to step up or confirms they won't, becomes less important than the fact that you've stopped accepting a connection that leaves you feeling empty. Recognition comes that two people being mutually avoidant might feel comfortable, but comfortable isn't the same as fulfilling. Acknowledgement follows that waiting indefinitely for the other person to create safety means you'll wait forever, because they're waiting for exactly the same thing from you. One person has to stop waiting and start acting in alignment with their actual needs to break the standoff. This might mean pulling back to see if the other person steps forward. It might mean accepting that neither person can give what the other needs and choosing to end the relationship. It might mean recognizing you've been using mutual avoidance to hide from your own fears of intimacy and deciding to work on those patterns regardless of what the other person does. Whatever path you choose, it starts with one person disrupting the comfortable distance both people have been maintaining. Consider what happens in the space between pulling back and seeing the other person's response. This interim period often reveals more about your own attachment patterns than you expected. You might discover that your avoidance wasn't just about the other person's unavailability, but about your own discomfort with vulnerability. You might notice that having space to focus on yourself feels liberating rather than lonely, suggesting the relationship was draining more than it was nourishing. You might realize that your desire for the relationship was more about familiarity and fear of being alone than about genuine connection with this specific person. This self-discovery process becomes valuable regardless of whether the relationship continues or ends. The interim period also tests your ability to tolerate uncertainty without trying to control the outcome. Avoidants typically struggle with situations where they can't predict what will happen or manage the emotional landscape. Pulling back and waiting to see how the other person responds puts you in exactly that kind of uncertain space. Your reaction to this uncertainty tells you something important about your own growth work. Can you sit with not knowing? Can you maintain your boundaries without constantly checking whether they're having the desired effect? Can you genuinely invest in your own life rather than using your new activities as a performance designed to trigger a response? These questions point toward the deeper work that both avoidants in the relationship need to address. External factors can complicate the standoff between two avoidants in ways that make the pattern even harder to break. If you live together, share finances, have children, or have deeply intertwined social circles, pulling back becomes more complex than simply reducing contact. You have to navigate daily interactions while maintaining emotional distance, which requires a more subtle shift in how you engage. The practical realities of shared life mean you can't disappear completely, so your pulling back shows up in decreased emotional investment rather than physical absence. You stop volunteering information about your inner life. You respond to practical matters without offering the emotional warmth that used to accompany those interactions. You maintain civil cooperation while withdrawing the emotional engagement that characterized your relationship before. These practical complications don't make breaking the standoff impossible, but they do require more intentionality about how you implement changes. The other person might not notice your emotional withdrawal as quickly when you're still physically present and handling shared responsibilities. This slower recognition can actually work in your favor because it allows you to establish your new patterns more firmly before the other person's attachment system responds. By the time they register that something fundamental has shifted, your emotional redirection is already well established rather than tentative, making it less likely you'll break the pattern too early when they show initial signs of increased engagement. Reflection on whether the relationship was ever truly intimate or just comfortable becomes necessary at some point in this process. Many avoidant-avoidant relationships confuse comfort with connection. Both people feel safe because neither demands vulnerability. But safety without vulnerability creates companionship, not intimacy. You might realize you've been in a relationship that functioned more like roommates who occasionally have sex than like romantic partners building a life together. This realization can be painful because it means acknowledging that what you thought was a relationship was actually just two people coexisting while avoiding real emotional connection. That acknowledgement is also liberating because it clarifies that breaking the standoff might not be about fixing the relationship, but about recognizing it never developed into what you needed it to be. The relationship between two avoidants doesn't have to stay stuck in a standoff. Breaking that pattern requires one person to risk being the one who moves first, either toward deeper vulnerability or toward the exit. That risk feels enormous when you've spent your life protecting yourself from the pain of emotional exposure. Staying in the standoff guarantees you'll never experience the intimacy both people claim to want, though. The question becomes whether the fear of staying stuck outweighs the fear of taking action. For many people, reaching that tipping point requires the relationship to become so unsatisfying that even the risk of change feels better than continuing the pattern. That moment of choosing discomfort over stagnation is what finally breaks the standoff, regardless of whether both people ultimately stay together or part ways. Share in the comments whether you've experienced a relationship standoff between two avoidant people and what finally shifted the dynamic. I'd love to hear how you navigated the tension between wanting connection and fearing vulnerability. If this video helped you understand the unique challenges of avoidant-avoidant relationships and gave you perspective on breaking the pattern, please like and subscribe for more content on attachment styles, relationship dynamics, and emotional growth. Thanks for watching.